there's not been an audit, an official audit, since I think it was 1956. Common sense, you have to ask, why is that? Why has there not been an audit?
Friends, thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world to me, and I know Bill Holter from JS Mineset appreciates it too. So please do spread this information with your friends, family, and colleagues. I think it's information they're going to want to hear about the fact that we have been lied to from cradle to grave, and I, for one, am fed up with it. I am so sick and tired of it, guys. Let's welcome Bill first. Bill, how are you?
Good, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. During the pre-call here, we were just chatting, and I was telling you that I am just sick and tired of the manipulation, and I'm sick and tired of the fact that nothing ever changes, the criminals never go to jail, and we're stuck in the same situation that we've been stuck in for 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 years, going all the way back to Nixon taking us off the gold standard. And I want to talk about Steve Mnuchin's visit to Fort Knox here in a minute, but first, we have been lied to from cradle to grave, haven't we?
Yeah, pretty much about everything. If you remember, I started this year off saying 2017 would be the year of the truth bomb, and I think you're seeing more and more truth. Just look at the pension situation. People are finding out, they worked for 30, 40 years, more, 50 years, and now they're finding out that what they thought they were going to retire on isn't there. And in fact, it hasn't been there for years. But I understand your frustration with the financial space because everything is managed, everything is rigged. But the rigs will fall and fail as more and more truth comes out.
Well, people are going to wake up whether they want to or not, and you mentioned pensions, so let me just briefly read this. First, public pensions. Now private pensions are falling apart too. This comes from Birch Gold Group. The pension crisis in America is speeding up. We've seen several public pensions fall in the past year, and a landmark court decision has allowed public pensions to slash benefits for the first time in history. Now private pensions are buckling as well. People are going to wake up as they watch their retirement accounts raided. You know who said it first, Bill? George Carlin. They're coming for it. They want it all, and they're going to get it.
Now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
Yeah. Well, they're underfunded. The numbers that they use for projections of 8% are unsustainable, especially in a zero interest rate world. And we've basically had no interest rates for the last 7 or 8 years. And on top of that, the amount that companies, states, etc., are actually funding with are not enough to begin with. So the pension truth bomb is one that the public will definitely take notice of because it's going to affect their individual monthly check. So, these people, as plan after plan piles up in this train wreck, more and more people are going to realize, hey, I've been lied to. What else have I been lied to about?
Well, yeah, they've been lied to about everything, not the least of which is 9/11, the anniversary for which just recently passed us. Google World Trade Center 7, guys, and that should leave you scratching your head, especially since BBC reported on the collapse of that building some 14 or 16 minutes before it actually collapsed. Bill, here's the thing
Sean,
about...
do you know how many people don't even know that there was a Building 7?
Well, I know. That's because we don't have an honest media. The mainstream media is as crooked as Wall Street because the mainstream media has been bought up by Wall Street, essentially. Wall Street's bought up everything. The corporations, the oligarchs, run the whole show. And you know what?
I always ask people, how do you explain Building 7?
And they say building what?
Exactly. They don't even know that Building 7 came down. I remember watching that day. I'd been in New York City, 50, 100 times. I lived close to New York City when I grew up. that I knew the World Trade Center area pretty well and knew which one was Building 7, and the guy standing there saying that it collapsed. And I'm screaming at the TV. My wife was asking me, why are you screaming at the TV? I said, because Building 7's right behind him. And he says it fell. I mean, I saw that, live. There is absolutely zero explanation for that.
Well, okay, now this is important too, because NIST, of course, took 6, 7, 8 years to come out with a report trying to explain the collapse of Building 7 without accounting for explosives. And essentially it couldn't do it. It came up with some new exotic form of collapse, progressive collapse, which has never before happened in human history. Has a steel-framed skyscraper collapsed due to fire. But NIST came out with a report trying to say that that's what happened. And now recently, just in the past year, the University of Alaska Fairbanks came out with a $300,000+ study where they tried to vet what NIST said and duplicate NIST's results. And they couldn't do it. And the conclusion of this report is Building 7 could not have collapsed due to fire, which makes the whole 9/11 official story fall apart at the seams.
Well, neither could Building 1 or 2, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, well, they actually make that point in the Fairbanks report as well. And I would like to point out a very important video for folks to watch. It was recently posted on the April Waters YouTube channel, and it is a presentation by Christopher Bolyn. And if you guys want to flush out exactly what happened on 9/11, you will find out that it was a Zionist operation, and the connections to Rothschild-controlled corporations and entities with the players involved, which he names in detail, are absolutely stunning. So I invite you to watch, I invite you to Google on YouTube Christopher Bolyn on the April Waters, Watters YouTube channel. It will drop your jaw. Now, here's the thing, Bill. We started this interview by saying we've been lied to from cradle to grave, and I just want to revisit something quite entertaining that was recently said by Steve Mnuchin, the U.S. Treasury Secretary and former Goldman Sachs alum, who says he visited the gold at Fort Knox. Now this is interesting because that makes him the first U.S. Treasury Secretary to visit Fort Knox since John Snyder did so in 1948. And after visiting, he sent out a tweet that said, "Glad gold is safe." Now, he doesn't say the gold's there. He says he's glad it's safe. Now, I think that tweet is very telling because literally he doesn't say, saw the gold, safe as a chickadee in a nest.
He doesn't even say our gold.
That's right. Glad gold is safe. And now that
he's
I've
making a statement, gold is safe.
Yeah. Right. It's safe in the care of the Rothschilds in the EU somewhere, probably. And I just want to read this to you guys. Now, this comes to me from a viewer who pulled it from Silver Doctors. And you tell me if this doesn't sound more like the truth. 66 billion in gold missing from Fort Knox. More than 66 billion worth of gold is missing from Fort Knox, claim top financial experts. Almost 7,000 tons of bullion, allegedly taken from the vaults, say Edward Durrell, an industrialist in Berryville, Virginia, and Dr. Peter Better, publisher of a respected financial newsletter. Quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that the gold is gone," Better told Globe. Now, guys, yes, this comes from the Globe, which I think is probably, roughly equates to the National Enquirer, which, by the way, has broken real news over its history, not the least of which is talking about the assassination of Princess Di. But let me continue. Better says, quote, "Between November 1973 and April 1974, millions of ounces of gold were drained out of Fort Knox by a handful of international speculators, including American bankers, with the blessing of the U.S. Treasury," end quote. Now, I could go on here, and I think I will just for the payoff here. He claims it was illegally sold to European sources, Bill, think Rothschild, for the bargain price of $42 an ounce, 1/4 the going rate at the time, and 1/10 of what it is worth now. Now, of course, that would make it only worth $420. Gold's trading closer to $1,300 now.
Now it's 1/30th.
Yeah. Victor Harkin, who was in charge of the Fort Knox reserves until recently, admits that one shipment of gold in 1971, then worth $500 million, took 33 15-ton trucks to haul out of there, end quote. Now, you guys tell me, does that sound more like the truth of what's happening at Fort Knox and what has happened? Or do you think Steve Mnuchin is telling the truth that our gold is safe? We've been lied to from cradle to grave, Bill.
There has not been an audit, an official audit, since I think it was 1956.
That's right.
And common sense, you have to ask, why is that? Why has there not been an audit? And I've said this time and again, that the Chinese have accumulated, on the back of a napkin I can show you, they've accumulated at least 20,000 tons. It will not shock me to see them bring armored cars and put it in their national stadium and say, here's our gold, where's yours?
Yeah, well, again, Mnuchin, glad gold is safe. Now, this article goes on. This is really important. I'm going to just read this last part. Durrell claims that what little gold still remains in Fort Knox, only about $6 billion worth, is of inferior quality. Quote, is mostly melted down gold coins, he told Globe, which is approximately 90% gold and 10% copper and not acceptable by international markets for trade. Now, that is so important because I think it rings far, far more true than Steve Mnuchin, former Goldman alum, coming out and saying gold is safe. Gold is safe tells us nothing. There's not a picture. There's not an audit. There's nothing but the word of a liar who formerly worked for Goldman Sachs.
Well, Sean, the important thing, okay, let's take his tweet. Gold is safe. Gold is safe because it's no one's liability. Gold is not backed by any government. It's not backed by any corporation. It's not backed by anyone's word. Gold is money, and it is no one else's liability. And before the call, when we were talking about, basically everything's a lie, what's going to happen is more and more truths are going to come out. And more people are going to wake up to the fact that their pensions are cooked. Politicians forget about being scoundrels. I mean, politicians, and I know you've done a lot on the pedophilia worldwide, that has got to cross the line of any sane person. People are going to find out more and more truths, and credit, which the whole world is based on, credit is advanced based on trust. And what's going to happen is trust is going to break down. As trust breaks down, so will credit. And everything runs on credit. Everything is valued by credit. Even the person who owns their own home, they paid cash for it. They're thinking, it won't affect me. Well, yeah, it will affect you, because if you ever want to sell your house and there's no credit, there are no buyers.
That's right.
So as credit breaks down, what's going to be the last thing, the only thing, or two things, that can be trusted? Pure money, and that's gold and silver.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is about this Fort Knox gold, and I just want to circle back to this because you're right. I think people are going to finally wake up when it's all gone, right? Like that humorous clip from South Park.
I got a $100 check from my grandma, and my dad said I need to put it in the bank so it can grow over the years.
Well, that's fantastic. A really smart decision, young man. We can put that check in a money market mutual fund. Then we'll reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
What's all gone?
The money in your account. It didn't do too well. It's gone.
What do you mean? I have $100.
Not anymore, you don't. Poof.
And it's gone. And people will wake up when they find out the emperor has no clothes and the emperor is daddy government, right? Because daddy government is not going to protect you when the dollar dies and when your pensions are gone. And here's the problem with the Fort Knox gold. Let's circle back because I think it's fascinating that the truest information, that the information that's probably the most accurate, comes to us from a 10 or 15-year-old article from the Globe. Let me just flesh this out a little further because I think it's spot on. And so let me continue. Better says he found out about the theft in 1974 from top officials in the American and foreign governments. He brought it to the attention of a congressional committee, but officials in the Treasury Department denied that any gold had been removed from Fort Knox. Of course they would deny that. Why would they admit to that? Let me continue. However, Chelf claimed he had eyewitnesses to the midnight heists. Quote, I had people posted on Lookout, and they would tell me the hour and minute when every load went out, end quote. The Treasury Department finally agreed to conduct an inspection of Fort Knox for a group of reporters and congressmen, but Durrell calls it, quote, a complete farce. He says only 2 of the 13 vaults were audited, quote, and instead of sampling the bars by boring holes into them to make sure they were gold all the way through, only small chips were taken from the outside. Durrell also claims that the reporters and congressmen were not allowed to touch the gold and were allowed to only look at it only through tiny peepholes. Does that sound like a Fort Knox that has the gold secured for the American people? Because if they did, they would have tours all day long.
I may be mistaken, but I believe Ed Durrell died under suspicious circumstances.
Oh, sure. Just like every eyewitness to the JFK assassination, just like multiple people that had truth to tell about World Trade Center 7 and what happened on 9/11. You hit the nail on the head right from the start. We've been lied to from cradle to grave, and I'm sick and tired of it. And you hit the nail on the head, too, with this pedophile, pedogate, Pizzagate stuff. The people at the top of the food chain, the people in the intelligence agencies and the people above them, the people that control the world, are pedophiles, and they use pedophilia to ensnare and entrap and control the people below them. And I tell you what, I know people are getting sick and tired of me saying it, but I believe it to be 100% true. The people at the top of the food chain are Luciferians, and that's why they victimize children. They have no problem with doing so, Bill, because it's part of their religion.
Well, and again, pedophilia crosses the line. It crosses the line of any sane, any decent person. It crosses the line. There's no possible way that anyone could argue for it. And when that does come out, I mean, that's a truth bomb that is so big that trust will be broken. It's all about trust, and trust is what credit runs on, and credit is what the world runs on.
Well, let me ask you something else here about pensions. Because the people who have pensions that are listening to this and are worried about their pensions are probably asking themselves, and rightly so, how could my pension be at any risk at all when the NASDAQ over the last 5 years has more than doubled? And it's a great question, and I'll give you the answer. The answer is because the NASDAQ is heavily weighted with Apple and Netflix and Amazon and a handful of others. And if you're not in those specific companies, you haven't enjoyed a 100+% return over the last 5 years.
Well, Sean, here's a question for you, and I posted this, I think, along with the Ohio, the announcement that the million people in Ohio, their plan is impaired. My question is, okay, so we've got these plans currently underwater. What happens when interest rates go up, stock markets go down, and we enter just a garden variety, nothing bad, nothing, just the average bear market in stocks and bonds? What's going to happen to pension plans then, if they're underfunded already?
That's my point. That's absolutely right. Because what I've just documented with the NASDAQ alone is more than 20% increase, a 20% return on the NASDAQ year over year for 5 years. And these things are still underfunded? What happens when the market turns? What happens when the market nosedives like it did in 2008 or like it did back in 2000 after the tech bubble burst? These people are going to be left as the bag holders, which again brings us full circle because that's exactly what George Carlin said would happen.
They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place.
They want your retirement money. Now they're coming for it. And you know what? They're going to get it.
They absolutely will. They already have it. They already have it because it's corralled.
Do you know
in many cases, you can't get to it. So there's nothing you can do to fix it. You can't, if you're in a state pension plan, you can't call a trustee and say, I want my portion in gold and silver.
Well, Bill, let me just round out the conversation with this. If anybody's listening to this saying, boy, those guys kind of sound pissed off, that's right, because it's called righteous indignation. We're sick and tired of the lies and the injustices. The bad guys never go to jail. the bad guys never go to jail. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's no justice. It's a system of justice for just us. It's the little guy that the law is always turned around on. Take a look at that DNC lawsuit from Elizabeth and Jared Beck. We know the DNC is corrupt. We know that they committed fraud. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to resign as the DNC head because she's a criminal. And the DNC lawsuit was thrown out of court. So what you're hearing in this conversation, guys, is righteous indignation. We're ticked, and we have every right to be ticked because this government is criminal. Final word from you, Bill.
Well, I don't know what the age cutoff would be, and obviously it bleeds both ways. I grew up I was a child in the 60s, and I grew up truth, justice, and the American way. You know, Americans were the good guys, the bad guys went to jail, and that's not the case. It has not been the case. And literally, it's not been the case, I believe, since 1963. There was, I mean, in my opinion, the JFK shooting was a coup. And our country has gradually, slowly changed, and it's changed toward non-truth, toward lies, and what we're living today is a complete hologram.
Right.
Because everything under the surface is a lie.
Well, and I think when you mention the assassination of JFK, you're talking about it was the end of the line for any hope we had of having a republic by and for the people. Because obviously once you wake up and you go down the rabbit hole, you go to 1913 and Woodrow Wilson, who said, there's a force unseen behind the scenes that's so powerful, so all-knowing, so omniscient, that you dare not speak above a whisper when you speak in condemnation of it, right? So 1913 Federal Reserve, then we find out about the central bank charters, the two of which were Rothschild controlled back in the 1800s. This is a rabbit hole that goes deep, and it always, always, always goes right back to the criminal international bankers. And that's why I started with Steve Mnuchin, former Goldman Sachs alum, who tells us, don't worry about the gold, it's safe. So I guess that brings us full circle. I mean, it always, always, always comes back to the bankers. And I think it was Mother Rothschild who once famously said, if my sons didn't want wars, there would be no war, because the bankers profit from wars. If my sons didn't want war, there would be no wars. There you have it.
Well, yeah, with wars, if you're backing both sides in a winner-takes-all match, guess what? You took all.
Yeah, that's right. It's like the Iron Bank from Game of Thrones. I'm not sure if you watched that, but you'll notice that at the very top, above all the warring factions, sits the Iron Bank, who always profits from every single conflict. No matter who wins, no matter who loses, the Iron Bank gets paid. That's one of the real truths. The banks at the top, the central banks, the bankers, they always win. All right, Bill. Well, thank you so much for your time, and tell people how they can find you online, will you?
You can go to www.jsmineset, MINESET.com.
Very good. Absolutely, guys. Visit jsmineset.com for Bill's articles and commentaries. And, of course, do visit us at sgtreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and thephaser.com for challenging information, real news, 24/7. And in the case of SGT Report, it's the antidote to corporate propaganda. Guys, thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. God bless.
9/11 was an outside job done by Israeli operatives, but with the cooperation and consent at the highest levels of the U.S. government